In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at measures of central tendency and spread. So what these are basically statistics or values that we look at to help us analyze data. So the first thing we're going to look at are measures of central tendency. Now, measures of central tendency, what they do is they usually refer to a central or a common value in a data set, and it generally represents the middle of a set of numbers, right? All these characteristics or all these values generally look at what we consider a middle of the set of numbers. And the three measures of central tendency that we're going to look at are mean, median, and mode. And you may have heard these terms before. Measures of spread, they help you describe the variability in a data set or in a set of data. So basically, in kind of the name itself, they describe how the data is spread out or how much it varies. Right? If it's very spread out, the numbers vary a lot, they're not close together. And there are three measures of spread: range, interquartile range, and standard deviation. Now, the two ones that we're going to focus on are range and interquartile range. Range is what we're going to focus on right now. Interquartile range we'll look at in a later lesson. But the key thing is just understanding what a measure of spread does. So going back to those central tendencies, we have mean. Mean is the average, is another word for it. So the average of your numbers or of your data sets. And basically it's calculated by adding up all of the numbers in the data set and then dividing by the total number of data points. So basically dividing it by how many numbers you have. And the mean represents all values in the data set because you're including all of them. So it represents all values. And again, we will go through some examples looking at this. So the mean can be misconstrued a little bit. If we look at this comic here, what would my starting salary be? I'll put it this way. Our average starting salary is $80,000. Doesn't sound too bad. $80,000 for a starting salary is pretty good. However, if we look at the actual data set, we can see that it is heavily skewed by one individual who's making $430,000 while everyone else is making $30,000 as a starting salary. So again, while the average is $80,000, it doesn't really represent the data, right? Because it is a little bit skewed. So that the mean can be a little bit misleading. Even if we're using the correct value, it can be a little bit misleading. The median is another word for the middle point or the data point that lies in the middle. And the key thing next is it's in the middle of the data set when ordered. So we need to order our numbers from lowest to highest first before we figure out what the middle value is. Now, when we're dealing with odd numbers, or if we have an odd number of data points, the median is the middle value. If we have an even number of data points, the median is the average of the two middle numbers. And again, we will look at an example with this. But again, the median is the middle value, and how you calculate it depends on how many data points or numbers in your data set. So again, looking at that, well, why should I invest with you? Well, not to brag, but my fund has a median gain of 8% per year. So if you're investing, you want to be gaining money, 8% per year is pretty good. However, when we look at all of the data points, if we were to order this, the mean might be 8%. However, it is heavily outweighed, or we can see that there are a lot of losses over the year. So again, the median can also be misleading, even if it is correct. The mode is the data point that shows up the most, so the number that occurs most frequently. Now, there are a couple situations that you could have. If all data points are unique, then you would say that there is no mode. you wouldn't say the mode is 0 because that would imply that the value of 0 or the number 0 occurs the most. So if all data points are unique or there's not one number that occurs more than the other, you would just say no mode. If there is a tie between the number of points that share the same value, then all values that are tied are considered the mode. So you are allowed to have a few more points or multiple modes. But if every value occurs the same amount of times, then there would be no mode. So again, mode can be a little bit misleading as well. So how are you doing on your tests? My modal category is 70 to 80%. Please don't ask about the mean. So here, again, which number occurs the most? Well, a score in the 70s. That occurs the most. However, we can see that that maybe isn't the best representation of this individual's marks because they have a lot of scores, albeit one in each, but they're relatively low. So maybe the mode isn't the best characteristic to use in this scenario. The one measure that we will look at for the measure of spread is the range. And the range is the easiest one to calculate. It is the easiest measure of spread. And basically it is the difference between the maximum or the highest data point and the lowest data point. So basically we take the highest data point and we subtract the lowest one from it, because remember, difference just means subtract. So we're subtracting our highest and our lowest data points. And that range is going to tell us or give us one indicator of how spread out our data is. So looking at range, again, range can be misleading as well. Our students come from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds. So basically all different income levels. Well, when we look at the number of students and the actual range of values, it's not, again, there is a large range of values from very small to very high. However, we can see that the majority are in what is considered the high income area. So again, the range can be misleading too. So again, the comics are just there to give you an idea of how some of these characteristics can be misleading. So you do have to be careful when making statements or when even reading these values. It might be interesting to think about in your midterm report cards or report cards in general, why it's switched from a class average to a class median. Right? So you can think of why is a median better to use to look at the class as a whole rather than the average? Or maybe should they go back to average? Again, it's something to think about based on what we now know about those terms. So let's look at an example. So for the following data set, we want to determine the mean, median, and mode, as well as the range. So we have our data set here. Now, when we have our data set, the easiest thing to probably do is put everything in order. So basically, let's order these numbers from smallest to largest. I think we have 3, 5, 6, another 6. And again, it might be a little time consuming, so with the magic of technology, we've created our ordered list. So it is easier, or it is a good choice to start with creating an ordered list, because it does help us, one, calculate the median, which we have to create the ordered list anyways, and two, it makes it easier to see the mode when we actually have to go through and look for which one occurs the most. So by looking at our list here, we should be able to start off with our mode. Our mode, we can see the one that occurs the most is 12, because 12 occurs 1, 2, and 3 times. Next easiest, I would say, would be also the range. The range is easy to calculate because we can clearly see our highest and our lowest value. So in this case, our highest value, 21, minus our lowest, 3, we then get a range of 18. So again, by ordering it, we're able to easily figure out two of those values, or two of our measures. The median might be a little bit more difficult, but again, that's why we ordered it in the first place. We do need to create an ordered list. So now we need to find the middle value. So an easy way to do it could be to just cross off the numbers one at a time from either end until you get to the middle. Now, if I were to cross off both these numbers, I don't have a middle value in between. So that means that these are going to be my two values that I'm going to be looking at for the median. And if we go back and look, we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we might have miscrossed off or miscounted. We have 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6. Forgot to cross one more off. So we actually, my mistake, we don't have two middle values. We only have one middle value. So in this case then, our median is just 12. We only have the one value. If we did have the two middle values, we'd have to calculate that value, or we'd have to calculate the average between the two of them. So there we have our median. Lastly, to calculate the mean, or the average, I'm just going to move this up a little bit because we have a bit more of a calculation there. We have to add up all of these values. So 3 plus 3 plus 5 plus 6 plus 6 plus 9 plus 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 16 plus 17 plus 18 plus 19 plus 20 plus 21. So we need to add up all of our data values. Oops. And then divide them by the number of data points, which is 15. And this will give us our mean. So when we add up all the values, we get 179 divided by 15. So we divide that by 15, we end up with 11.93 repeating. So we find that our mean is 11.93. You could say that's roughly 12, and so we can see that it doesn't really matter what we choose, mean, median, or mode, we get roughly the same value of 12. So 12 would be a good representation of, again, the middle of this data set. And by the range, we can see that it does vary greatly because we do have a large range there. So looking at another example, the hourly rate for employees at a supermarket are given below. We want to find the mean, median, mode, and range of the data. So again, same idea as before. Let's start off by ranking our values first. So we have 7.85, 8.5, and again, we don't have to use technology for this one to skip ahead because this is a relatively shorter list. 9.25, 10.85, 11.50, 12.65, and 16.25. So that is our ordered list. And now we can go through and calculate or find our measures of central tendency and spread. So again, mode is probably the easiest one to find first. whichever one occurs the most. In this case, it is 850. We can see that that value occurs twice, or the most out of all the other ones. Our range, again, will also be relatively easy to find because our range is just going to be our highest value, or 16.25, minus our lowest, which is 7.85. So we get a range of 8.4, because again, we're taking our highest value and subtracting our lowest value from it. So by ordering it, it lets us easily find those two values. Our median is again going to be in the middle. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 values. So in this case, when we go through and we cross off one on each end, we find that we're left with 2 middle values. And again, we could have determined this because we have an even number of data points, so we're going to end up having 2 middle values. So what we do now is we take our 2 middle values and find the average. So 9.25 plus 10.85 divided by 2, because again, the average is you add up the two numbers and divide by the sum, or by how many data points you have, sorry. So 9.25 plus 10.85 divided by 2, and we get 10.05. For our mean, again, our average is probably the more time-consuming one to calculate, but again, we can add up all of our values. So 7.85 plus 850 plus 850 plus 9.25 plus 10.85 plus 11.5 plus 12.65 plus 16.25. Let me just move this up. And we're going to divide all of this by 8, because that is how many data points we have. So when we go through and we calculate this, or add them all up, we should get 85.35 divided by 8, which gives us a mean of 10.67. So looking at this, we have different values for a mean, median, and mode. So again, we might have to think about which one better represents the data. So if we go through and look, which one do we think best represents the data and why? So looking at this, might argue, we can see our mean, median, and mode. Let's just write them over here just so we have them for reference. Our mean is 10.67. Our median is 10.05, and our mode is 8.50. So which one of those values best represents our data? Well, based on our data, again, you could have different reasons depending on what your reasoning is. Right? As long as you have a good, solid reasoning, you could probably argue any of them, but there are some better options. So which one best represents the data? Well, looking at them, I would say the mode doesn't really represent the data because it's the two lowest values, right? Or part of the two lowest values. But we see the majority of people earn more than that. And it's only 2 people out of 8, so it's not a high percentage of people that are earning this much. If it was like the comic that we saw earlier, where it was like 7 of 8 people earning the same amount, then that might be more of a better representation. But mode really only matters when the number or the number of items is important. So it could be looking at things like the number of goals maybe scored, or something like that, or the number of items bought, or the number of purchases made. Right? When we're looking at dollars, the amount isn't quite important, or the one that occurs the most isn't quite important. So in this case, I would say that the median best represents the data. And why? Well, it shows the middle value. So kind of roughly in the middle of what people really kind of owe or earn. It kind of shows kind of where the middle where everyone stands. So it shows the middle value, and it avoids the high values, the highs and lows. So if we look at our numbers, we have some high values of 16.25, and we have some low values of 7.85. So the median kind of avoids those. It's not really influenced them because every number has its every number is kind of its own in terms of positions, right? It doesn't matter how high the number is, it still has a position that's one above or one below. So if you look at when we order it, the fact that it was 16.25 didn't really influence it other than it was the highest value. So which answer would most misrepresent the data and why? Well, you could say the mode, because again, it's only 2 people out of 8. So the mode is only 2 people out of 8. So it's not really representing all 8 people. It's not really even taking into consideration the other values. You could also say the mean, because it's influenced by the high and low values. So that high value of 16.25 raises our average or raises our mean. The low value could also affect it by pulling it down or dropping it a bit. So again, the mean is influenced by those high extreme values. So it depends on what you're looking at. If you were to add in the owner or the franchisee or someone high up, the CEO of the grocery store or the supermarket, right, their salary or their hourly wage would probably heavily influence this data. So you look at the 16.25, that is I would say a relatively large jump compared to all the other values or other salaries. So that one is pulling the average up. And you can see comparing the mean and the median, it's pulling it up almost 60 cents. Right? So that's close to $1 more than you could say not on average, because we're not looking at average. But it raises or changes the value by almost $1. So again, you could say that the mean, because it's influenced, doesn't really represent the data. So again, the main thing here is just looking at the measures of central tendency and spread, understanding how to calculate them for a given data set, as well as understanding which ones might best represent the data, or at least understanding from the comics we saw how they might be influenced.